So, what if America's foreign policy is on the cusp of a massive transformation? A shift back to the age of empire building, where the US takes bold, unilateral action to reclaim its regional sphere of influence. Donald Trump's recent rhetoric surrounding Greenland, Panama, and even Canada suggests just that. These aren't mere musings, they represent a strategic recalibration that could define the future of US dominance on the global stage. But is this aggressive push for control a stroke of genius or a reckless gamble? In this December 2024 piece for The Guardian, Trump's threats over Greenland, Panama, and China, what it means for America's future. The implications of Trump's moves are laid bare. He's not just reacting to China's growing influence, he's reasserting the U.S. role as the undisputed power in the Western Hemisphere. CNN took a deeper look in their January 2025 analysis. Trump's strategy for Greenland, Canada, and Panama, a global power struggle, emphasizing how Trump's focus on these territories could be part of a larger geopolitical maneuver against China, Russia, and Iran. Meanwhile, the New York Times weighed in with Trump's obsession with the Panama Canal, Greenland, a new era of isolation or domination, revealing that these territorial ambitions are more than about resources. They're about sending a bold message that America will go to any length to secure its interests. So why now? What's driving Trump's desire to turn back the clock on U.S. foreign policy? Is this vision of reclaiming strategic territories justifiable? Or is it setting the stage for a fragmented, more competitive international order? Now that we have set the stage for Trump's larger foreign policy ambitions, let's dive deeper into one of the most significant aspects of his strategy: Greenland. As the Arctic ice continues to melt, opening up new shipping lanes and exposing untapped natural resources, Greenland has become an increasingly coveted prize. For Trump, this is more than just territorial interests, it's a pivotal piece in the global power struggle. But why exactly does Greenland matter so much in today's geopolitical landscape? Well, Greenland's role in the Arctic has taken a new level of importance, driven by global climate change and shifting geopolitical priorities. As melting polar ice opens up new shipping routes, the region has become a gateway for global trade and a treasure trove of untapped resources. Greenland itself is rich in rare earth minerals, oil and gas resources critical to modern technology and energy needs. It's no surprise that China has been investing heavily in Greenland's infrastructure, aiming to secure a foothold in the strategical vital area. For the US, Greenland represents more than just natural resources. It's a key to maintain dominance in the Arctic at a time when Russia and China are rapidly expanding their influence in the region. Trump's interest in Greenland, famously dismissed at the time as a far-fetched idea, reflects a deeper strategic calculation. His remarks may have seemed unconventional, but they do highlight a critical issue: Greenland's value as a geopolitical asset in the race for Arctic dominance. By securing Greenland, the US could strengthen its military presence and influence in the region, while countering the growing ambitions of rivals like China. On a grander scale, Trump's focus on Greenland ties into his broader approach to foreign policy, emphasizing competition with China and securing American dominance in emerging strategic areas. As climate change reshapes the Arctic landscape, the region is becoming a new frontier for global power struggles. Greenland, with its resources and location, sits at the heart of this competition. Ignoring its importance could leave the US playing catch up in a region that's quickly becoming a cornerstone of the 21st century geopolitics. So, to me, right now, in the global political landscape, Greenland is very much so clearly something America has its eyes on. We already know that much because we're currently seeing it. And, if I can be honest here, Trump is a very calculating man. And I'm not saying this to boost his ego at all, but he does understand the strategic importance of keeping China out of America's backyard. I'll touch more on that later in the video. So, what's the real reason Trump seems so fixated on Greenland? Well, to put it simply, it's those untapped resources, minerals, just waiting to be mined, extracted, and even traded. It's basically all about boosting America's economy, maybe even revitalizing a job market that's been pretty much stagnant for a while now. Then there's the control of Arctic shipping routes. So let's say if America had a foothold in Greenland, Trump could theoretically tax the ships passing through those northern waters, which is another economic play. And of course, let's not forget the geopolitical angle here. keeping Russia's ambitions in the Arctic in check. Now, whether Trump's vision for Greenland involves a deal, economic leverage through tariffs, or something as extreme as military action, it's bound to create friction with Denmark. Such a move would undoubtedly strain America's relationship with Denmark, especially since they're NATO allies, of course. And here's where it gets even more complicated than it currently is. It's because of NATO's dynamics at play. All NATO countries, in many ways, act as vassal states to America. But if Trump were to push for Greenland aggressively, would NATO's Article 5 get dragged into the mix is the question. And it is something worth thinking about. Ultimately, Greenland isn't just your quiet icy expanse. It's a potential battleground for influence and control that we are now seeing, perhaps even over the next coming decades, whether America claims it or not. The question of who will dominate Greenland's resources and strategic position is something the world will be watching closely. We can see here that Greenland's natural resources and military significance are undeniable. But when we step back and consider the bigger picture, there's more at play. Other areas critical to global trade and geopolitical influence are clearly on Trump's radar. Take the Panama Canal, for instance, a vital trade artery that serves as both an economic lifeline and a strategic power level for the US in the Western Hemisphere. So, why has the Panama Canal become such a focal point in Trump's foreign policy? The Panama Canal is undeniably one of the world's most strategic waterways, connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans and serving as a lifeline for global commerce. Its significance has grown in the recent years as China expands its economic footprint in Panama and the surrounding region. Trump's comments about potentially reclaiming the canal may have sounded provocative, but they underscore a larger theme in his foreign policy: securing American influence over critical international choke points. Given the US's historical role in constructing the canal, Trump's dissatisfaction with Panama's control reflects his view that such an asset should align with US interests. On a broader scale, Trump's focus on the Panama Canal aligns with his strategic push to reassert American dominance over key infrastructure and trade routes. The canal is more than just an economic conduit. It's a geopolitical flashpoint where the US faces increasing competition from China. Beijing's growing presence in the region through investments and influence challenges US's long-standing position as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. For Trump, the Panama Canal represents a tangible symbol of the struggle between the US and China for global influence. By advocating for greater US control, or at least a stronger presence in its operation, Trump seeks to counter China's ambitions and ensure the critical trade routes remain under Western influence. The canal's importance goes beyond economics. It's about shaping the balance of power in a region that's becoming a focal point of the United States and China in terms of competition. As such, Trump's stance is less about nostalgia for the past US control and more about recognizing the canal as a critical asset in the evolving landscape of the global geopolitics. This is where I find myself agreeing with Trump on the idea of controlling the Panama Canal. If you really take a closer look at the history behind it, the canal's importance becomes crystal clear. So basically, here's a quick rundown. Back in 1903, American forces intervened in what is now Panama, essentially carving it away from Colombia. By 1904, the construction of the canal began, and it officially opened in 1915, revolutionizing global trade by giving the US control over a critical trade route. Fast forward to 1977, and Jimmy Carter signed a specific treaty, basically transferring control of the canal to Panama, a move some still debate to this day. Now, Trump's perspective here is deeply rooted in something different: the growing influence of China, of course. He sees controlling the canal as a way to push back against the influence, using tariffs on ships passing through, not only to generate revenue, but also to reassert American dominance there. This definitely would fundamentally reshape Central and South America. In fact, Trump's approach feels like a modern revival of the Monroe Doctrine, arguably more aggressive than any president before him. Of course, this does come with significant risks, as all things do. It could also backfire by driving South American nations closer to the BRICS organization, uniting them in opposition to America's weaponized tariffs. And let's not ignore the undercurrents of tensions with Mexico. The Mexican president whether seriously or not, has even floated maps suggesting a historical claim to the lands now that are part of America. The geopolitical ripple effects here could be huge. So while the Panama Canal is undeniably a critical choke point for the global trade and a cornerstone of US influence, but Trump's rhetoric doesn't stop there. Oh no, it also zeroes in on Canada itself. With its immense natural resources and a key position in the Arctic, Canada holds the potential to reshape the power dynamics in North America. So, how does Trump's focus on Canada fit into the broader vision of securing the Western Hemisphere's resources and cementing economic dominance? Well, Trump's musing about incorporating Canada into the US may sound like political fantasy, but they do reveal a lot about his America First mindset and transactional approach to foreign policy. Canada's wealth of natural resources, which is oil, timber, and minerals, would undeniably bolster the US economy, particularly in the energy sector itself. Beyond just economics, Canada's geographic proximity makes it a strategic asset for securing Arctic shipping lanes and expanding U.S. influence in the increasingly contested Arctic region. While the idea of such an annexation may seem far fetched, it fits neatly into Trump's larger geopolitical strategy of consolidating American power in the Western Hemisphere and prioritizing unilateral gains over traditional diplomacy. On a deeper level here, the notion of incorporating Canada highlights Trump's tendency to view international relations as more so business deals. For him, it's not about fostering partnerships, but about maximizing American advantage, even if it disrupts long-standing alliances or even raises complex legal and diplomatic hurdles. From a trade's perspective, absorbing Canada would give the US unprecedented leverage in shaping global markets. Militarily, it would also provide strategic depth and further solidify U.S. dominance in North America. More broadly, Trump's rhetoric reflects a shift in U.S. foreign policy under his leadership, one that obviously values consolidation of power over cooperation. The mere suggestion of such a move underscores the declining emphasis on multilateralism and the rise of a more aggressive, self interest approach to geopolitics. Whether or not this was a serious proposition, it signals Trump's readiness to challenge traditional norms and reshape the global power dynamics to serve his vision of US supremacy. So, I personally think that Trump's proposal for a merger with Canada is honestly a toss up. It could go either way. On one hand, it might pull Canada out of its current economic stagnation, opening the door for growth and relief that the current Canadian administration hasn't been able to deliver to its own citizens. It could also appeal to the provinces in Canada that have actually floated the idea of joining America, or at least entertained the thought. That's why Trump has been pushing the idea of using economic pressure instead of military force to bring Canada into its fold as the 51st state. But here's the flip side. Canada has a strong sense of national pride, as any country should. Their military has never lost a war, and losing their sovereignty, whether through economic pressure or worse, could be a major blow to its national identity. It could also damage America's and NATO's reputations, making it seem like one ally is swallowing the other. So Trump's usage of tariffs as a weapon ties back to his belief that Canada hasn't been holding up its end of the NAFTA deal, at least from his perspective. Another reason for his push is, well, China. Trump is deeply concerned about how China has been buying up land and property in Canada, seeing it as a threat to America's sphere of influence. And this isn't just about Canada. It fits into his broader regional strategy. Recently, he has been talking about Greenland controlling the Panama Canal and now even Canada. Lastly, there's the Arctic, of course. Trump has had his eyes on controlling the Arctic Circle and its resources, which ties into his regionalism approach rather than the vision of outright global dominance. Sure, some might argue this is just another chapter in America's long history of interventionism, but for now, let's move on. Now, as we have seen, Trump's focus on Greenland and Canada isn't just about land. It's part of a bigger push to tighten the US grip on the Western Hemisphere. But what's even more telling here is how it fits into a broader trend, a shift away from global cooperation, as China and Russia assert themselves even more, as we're currently witnessing the end of the US unipolar dominance. So, let's take a closer look what this really means for the US foreign policy moving forward. Trump's push to reclaim influence over Greenland, Panama, and even Canada signals a revival of the American First Doctrine with a 21st century twist. Drawing parallels to the Monroe Doctrine of the 19th century, Trump's rhetoric reflects a desire to reaffirm U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. But unlike the Monroe Doctrine, which is aimed to counter European powers, Trump focuses on the rising influence of China, Russia, and even Iran, which have increasingly established a foothold in the Americas. From Chinese investments in Latin America to Russian ties with countries like Venezuela, this shifting geopolitical landscape poses a direct challenge to U.S. authority in its traditional sphere of influence. For Trump, this answer is clear. Doubling down on control over strategic territories and resources can bolster U.S. dominance while blocking foreign powers from gaining ground. Greenland also offers access to rare earth minerals and Arctic critical shipping lanes. The Panama Canal remains a vital trade choke point that the U.S. can't afford to let slip further into China's orbit. And even Trump's bold rhetoric about Canada reflects a larger vision of consolidating power over the Western Hemisphere's most valuable resources and strategic assets. This approach suggests a potential pivot toward a new era of continentalism, where the U.S. shifts away from multilateral cooperations that have characterized the post Cold War era. Instead, Trump's strategy prioritizes unilateral action and direct engagement to secure American interests. It's a very bold departure that seeks to reestablish U.S. dominance in the face of mounting competition. While this approach may resonate with its base, it also risks escalating tensions with rivals and alienating traditional allies, raising questions about long term sustainability of this aggressive, American centered vision of global power. As I mentioned earlier, Trump's regionalistic foreign policy seems to be rooted in his American First Doctrine, or perhaps his personal ambitions, depending on how you see it. Either way, it's a clear sign that America may be shifting its focus inward, prioritizing the home front and its immediate neighbors over Europe. Now, if Trump were serious about the ideas like taking Greenland or even annexing Canada, assuming he's not trolling here, again, assuming, this would lend more credibility to Russia's justification for its actions in Ukraine, with claims like American hypocrisy becoming harder to refute. The same logic could also apply to China if it were to move on Taiwan. What stands out here to me is Trump's apparent focus on continentalism, the idea of centering US priorities on the North American continent. But if Trump were to follow through on his rhetoric about Canada, the consequences would just alienate allies overseas. He'd risk isolating America within its own hemisphere, damaging relationships across both North and South America. With the shifting of the US influence in the Western Hemisphere, we are forced to confront a much bigger issue: the potential decline of the American unipolar order. As the US rethinks its strategy in the Americas, it's impossible to ignore the bigger global context. Competing powers are challenging America's hegemony in ways we haven't seen before. So, let's see how Trump's foreign policy might be signaling the end of US global dominance and the start of a new geopolitical era. Trump's foreign policy ambitions, whether it's pursuing influence over Greenland, Panama, or even Canada, marks a significant shift in the path of the U.S. global dominance. For decades, the U.S. operated as a central force in a unipolar world order, shaping international norms and fostering alliances that maintain global stability. Trump's approach, however, leans heavily on unilateral action and an American first philosophy that challenges these established systems. While this assertive stance aims to reassert U.S. power, it risks alienating key allies and undermining very international organizations that have supported economic and geopolitical cooperations for decades. This strategy comes at a critical moment when rising powers like China and Russia are already challenging U.S. authority in the globe. Trump's aggressive moves could inadvertently hasten the end of American global hegemony, paving the way for a multipolar world where global influence is shared among competing powers. Greenland and Panama, for instance, are more than just territories. They represent critical access points for resources, trade, and strategic dominance in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. The broader implications of this shift are greatly profound. As the US distances itself from multilateral agreements and alienates traditional partners, it risks creating a fragmented international order. This could lead to an increased competition, not just between the US and its rivals, but also among regional powers, vying for influence in a less centralized global system. For Trump, the appeal of this strategy may lie in short term gains, but the long term consequences, diminished alliances, reduced soft power, and a more unstable world, could fundamentally alter America's role on the global stage itself. So, Trump's America First policy, at least in the way he talks about it, is, dare I say, living up to the hype of how he envisions America should operate. That's assuming, of course, he's actually going to follow it through this time. But let's not kid ourselves, guys. This approach will definitely piss off the international community and America's allies. NATO members and the EU, in particularly, would be thrown into a panic. Why? Because if Trump somehow pulls off taking Canada and Greenland, it could render NATO's Article 5 meaningless. And let's be real, no NATO member is going to challenge America's ambitions outright, not while the USD remains the global currency. Trump knows this better than anyone. Sure, some leaders like Macron or Denmark's prime minister might say they don't accept such moves, but let's not underestimate Trump's ability to weaponize tariffs. He has turned them into a negotiating tool so effective it's hard to ignore, and this is called the door in the face technique, where he makes a massive outlandish demand knowing it'll be rejected, only to follow up with a smaller, more reasonable request, the one he actually wanted all along. It's smart, no question about it, and if he uses this strategy to pressure Canada and Greenland into deals, it could definitely work for him. But the consequences? They're going to be obviously huge. Moves like this would only accelerate the shift towards a multipolar world. The rise of BRICS, combined with a potential Russian victory in Ukraine, would reshape the international order faster than most of us anticipated. If Trump isn't trolling here, mind you, with this kind of rhetoric, and I want to emphasize that if, then his actions might pave the way for other powers like Russia and China to expand their own ambitions. In doing so, the unipolar world order as we know it would be over. So, looking ahead, the shift towards a multipolar world could completely reshape global power dynamics as we know it. As Trump navigates those complex geopolitical waters, it's crucial to ask, how will the US adjust in a world where power isn't concentrated in just one superpower anymore? Let's take a moment to reflect on the potential consequences of this changing global order. Now, to wrap all of this up, Trump's strategy for securing those key regions or countries is quite simple: keep China in check, put European allies in their place, and block Russia. After all, he is quite the salesman who knows how to work people, right? Even without holding office, Trump's gotten away with his words. Just recently, Danish officials were in touch with him regarding his offhanded comments about buying or taking Greenland. The Prime Minister of Greenland seems more interested in what the US can offer them than what Denmark already does for them. I'm sure some deal will eventually be struck, but it's something to watch out for. But when it comes to the Panama Canal, with its historical ties to America's construction of it, I think Trump would have very little trouble asserting more control over it, if I'm being honest. Other than that, guys, have a great day.